Okay, hi. So this is going to be a very quick overview of the elements of drama, which, because we've done so much work on fiction, poetry, um, well, fiction and poetry, you have a really strong base for drama because drama and theater, the format of the writing of the plays is, of course, a different format than we find in stories and in poetry. Um, but the elements of literature remain relatively constant. There's a big difference between prose and poetry. Drama is interesting because it can sort of be a fusion. Mostly it's prose, but there can be poetic elements in it. And, of course, because it's a story you're telling through actors and through dialogue, you follow the same, essentially, story arc we learned about in fiction. So there's not a ton that we have to go over again. If you're feeling a little bit unsure about some of these elements that we've gone over with both fiction and poetry, of course, all those videos are still up. You can go back and review those and think about how they might fit into the play you just read, Trifles, and how they will fit into the play I'm going to assign this week. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the section in your book called Elements of Drama, which I would like you to read. But like I said, I wanted you to pay more attention to the intro from last week, and you really needed to read thoroughly all the chapters on poetry and all the chapters on fiction. But this chapter can be more of like a review for you, because most of the stuff you already have a foundation in. So just a couple notes that I want to go over with you. Your book says some interesting things about tone with regard to plays. Tone is pretty much exclusively the writer's attitude about the content about which they're writing. Your book refers to it as something slightly different because it's actually using the word tone to describe tone of voice, because in a play you have the benefit of having speakers actually deliver lines, and so their tone of voice is relevant. The tone of voice of an actor delivering a line can still carry the tone of the writer towards their attitude, their tone towards the content with which or about which they are writing. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand that tone is indeed the author's attitude towards the content. In this case, it also means tone of voice, and tone of voice can also carry the understanding to the reader of what the author's attitude towards the content about which they're writing is. I hope that made sense. All right, so obviously language, we're going to get, drama. I keep wanting to say poetry because that's where I feel safest. Drama clearly uses language, as all writing does. And so drama is going to rely just as heavily on things like metaphor, figurative language as poetry, and prose, probably less than poetry. Fiction and drama both rely on it a little bit less than poetry, but certainly they have access to it. And so you will see similes and metaphors and what your book calls figures of speech all throughout different plays. All right, one thing I want to say about symbols. So we spent a while talking about that with regard to poems. In a play, it's a bit different, only because when you're reading a play, even if you don't have the opportunity to watch it performed live, when you're reading a play, read all the stage directions, because the stage directions, those little italicized pieces under the dialogue or the actual the play's writing, I'm stumbling over words tonight, that will give you insight into what the characters are physically supposed to be doing. This is called blocking, how they move across the stage. But it also gives insight into what objects are being used. And objects in plays and movies and any performance can, as they do in poetry and prose, they can become symbols. An object can become a symbol. The difference is that in drama, there might be a stage direction about what that object is supposed to do, how it is supposed to carry the symbol that it's supposed to carry. And so it's almost like in drama while we're reading, sometimes for a reader, it's like almost a little less work because the stage direction give you that insight, that insight into the writer's mind, about what they are trying to execute with their symbol. Whereas in a poem, Wallace Stevens' The Jar, the anecdote of the jar, it's up to us to figure out what that jar is. There's no stage direction where Wallace Stevens is like, oh, right, and the jar, I totally meant this, right? By the way, those who wrote about the jar, I find that to be one of the most puzzling poems, and those who wrote about it, I think, did a great job, gave me new insight, so thank you. But yeah, so we don't get that little whisper, right, of like what something means in a poem. But we do in drama. And so that's kind of cool. So don't miss that. Don't avoid the stage directions when you're reading. It's really important that you actually pay attention to them because they give you insight into what this writer is intending and how the director should direct the actors. And it's interesting. It's a peek behind the veil when it comes to writing, which is interesting. All right, I want to go over the 3 kinds of irony that we might see in a play. I find irony a very kind of tricky thing to nail down. I actually saw, I think it was a lecture on irony, saw a really good lecture recently, a panel of poets who were all brilliant, discussing irony. And one of the poets, and I loved her for this, she said, can we just stop and define our terms? Because we all know that the textbook academic definition of irony, but I don't know that I know what it means. And that's kind of the thing about it. It escapes meaning, right? Or it defies definition or can defy definition. So I actually might, if I can find that panel again, link that here, just so you guys have some insight into irony from other people besides me in your book. Of course, that was about poetry, but I think we can apply it to all of this. But anyway, so the 3 kinds of irony in a play. You're going to see dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is... and you'll see why it's called dramatic in a second, it's the difference or the space between what we as the audience know and what the character we're watching knows. So the character may have one story, and then because we're watching the whole story and we have access to those other characters and their perspectives, we know possibly more or a different angle than what the character knows. So that would be dramatic irony. And again, the reason it's dramatic isn't that it causes drama, although it certainly does in a lot of plays, and you can see why, but rather that it's portrayed dramatically. Our insight into the irony is through the dramatic presentation of the characters and their dialogue, right? Or monologue. The other thing we have is situational irony, and that is the kind of distance between the expectations, either of the character or us, or both. You're right, the viewers and the audience and the character. Our expectations of what will happen versus the actual results. So irony exists when an expectation is defied. So we think things should go a certain way, and then they go a totally different way. And it's not just a turn in the plot, right? It's that everything was pointing us in this direction, and then all of our expectations are defied. And then finally, we've got verbal irony. This is when the literal meaning of words has a double meaning, a double entendre, basically. And the verbal irony, and this is where tone comes in, tone of voice, not necessarily author's attitude, but tone of voice helps a lot with verbal irony because there are moments when you have a phrase that a character is saying that means more than one thing, but the subtlety of that is it's easy to miss the second meaning, right? And so the way that the actor delivers the line, the way that the writer handles the stage directions in telling the actor how to deliver the line, and the way that the director handles the interpretation of those stage directions can really make or break a line of verbal irony. An example is in Shakespeare, in I think Romeo and Juliet, but probably in like a lot of his plays, swords usually don't only mean a sword, right? When there are male-bodied people in the play fighting with swords, they are often talking about their swords, but their swords are a symbol for their phallus, their male-bodiedness, right? And they're kind of having this fight. And even if they are actually fighting with swords, they're always talking about something else. And so that's an example of verbal irony where there are 2 meanings to something, and it is up to the actor and the writer and the stage instructions and the interpretation of all of that to deliver that verbal irony. All right, so I feel like that's pretty much all I have for you with regard to elements of drama that are a little bit different or specific or unique outside of the essential elements of literature that we've been looking at this whole time with both prose and poetry. So I think I'm going to end this video, and the next video will be the next assignment. I don't think I'm going to have time to do this tonight, but tomorrow I might try to upload an outline for anyone who's struggling with the poetry research paper. I have some thoughts on how you can kind of put that together. Thanks for those of you who have already sent in your paper. For those of you who wanted to check in about their draft, I'm trying to get those. I don't usually do that because I don't usually have time, but I know this is a more difficult paper and we're running out of time. So I'm going to try to give you feedback tomorrow at the very latest for those. And I think that's it. If anyone has questions or is really struggling, please let me know and I'll try to meet with you. Your poetry paper is not due until next Tuesday, but like I said, I encourage you to try to get it done Friday so I can try to look at it this weekend, so I can try to give you feedback so you have feedback while you're working on the next essay. All right, so yes, next video is the assignment, the next essay assignment, and I feel like there's something else I had to tell you, but I think that's it. I will put the page numbers of the chapter you have to read, but it's the elements of drama, but I'll put the page numbers under this video. Thank you.